My name is Jason Walker, 31 years old, and I was the financial backbone of my family until they pushed me too far. For years, I paid my sister Melissa's tuition, covered my parents' mortgage, and bankrolled their lifestyle while they took me for granted. When they demanded I apologize to my manipulative sister or get cut off from the family, I made a decision that changed everything. Before I dive into how my family learned the hard way who really kept them afloat, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Also, hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to make tough choices with entitled family members. I grew up in a seemingly typical middle-class American family in suburban Michigan. My parents, Richard and Barbara Walker, worked steady jobs that provided us with comfortable but not luxurious lives. Dad managed a local hardware store while Mom worked as an administrative assistant at an insurance company. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house with a small backyard in a neighborhood filled with similar families. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect American family, but inside our home there was always an unmistakable imbalance. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my sister Melissa, 2 years younger than me, was the golden child. When we were kids, this manifested in small but noticeable ways. If we both wanted the last cookie, Melissa got it. If we both wanted to choose what to watch on our single television, Melissa's choice prevailed. When birthday and Christmas came around, her pile of presents always towered over mine. "Your sister is more sensitive," my mother would whisper when I questioned the unfairness. "You need to be the bigger person because you're stronger." I accepted this explanation because what else could a child do? I buried myself in schoolwork, determined to excel where I could. By high school, the pattern was firmly established. I maintained straight A's, joined the debate team and math club, and spent weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter. Meanwhile, Melissa scraped by with C's and D's, constantly involved in drama with her friends and various boyfriends. Yet somehow her academic struggles and social conflicts were always met with concern and support, while my achievements were treated as expected. "Of course you got accepted to Michigan State," my father said when I received my college acceptance letter, barely looking up from his newspaper. "You always do well in school." But when Melissa barely graduated high school and got accepted to a community college, my parents threw her a massive party, inviting extended family and friends to celebrate her perseverance. College was where I first tasted real independence. I had earned a partial scholarship that covered about half my tuition, and I worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore and another 15 hours waiting tables on weekends to pay for the rest. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, ate ramen more often than not, and bought used textbooks that were sometimes several editions out of date. Meanwhile, Melissa enrolled in community college, dropped most of her classes midway through the first semester, and spent her days shopping and partying. My parents covered her tuition, gave her a monthly allowance, and let her continue living at home rent-free. When she totaled her car after driving home intoxicated from a party, they bought her a new one within a week. "Your sister is still finding herself," my mother explained when I questioned this during a rare visit home. "Not everyone has your drive, Jason." Despite the clear favoritism, I maintained a relationship with my family. I called home weekly, visited on major holidays, and tried to believe that eventually my parents would recognize the imbalance. After graduation, I landed a job at a financial technology startup in Detroit. The pay wasn't incredible at first, but I worked obsessively, climbing from junior analyst to team leader within 3 years. By the time I turned 27, I was making 6 figures as a senior financial systems architect. I bought a comfortable condo in a nice part of Detroit, invested wisely, and built an emergency fund. I was financially secure for the first time in my life, and that's when the requests started coming. First, it was my father calling about a temporary cash flow problem with their mortgage. Could I help them out just for a month or two? Of course I could, and I did. Then it was my mother explaining that Melissa had finally decided to go back to school at the state university, but tuition was so expensive these days. Would I consider helping my sister get her education on track? Again, I agreed. What started as temporary assistance quickly became a regular arrangement. I was paying my sister's full tuition at $29,000 per year. I was covering my parents' $2,500 monthly mortgage payment. I was sending extra money for emergencies that somehow occurred every few months. Before I knew it, I was transferring nearly $50,000 annually to my family, all while Melissa continued to change majors, take semester breaks, and stretch her 4-year degree into its 6th year. The lack of gratitude was what began to eat at me. My parents never thanked me without immediately mentioning another expense they were facing. Melissa texted only when she needed money for books, spring break trips, or a new laptop because her perfectly functional one was too slow. No one ever asked about my life, my work, or my dreams. Last Christmas, I spent $3,000 on gifts for my family. My parents gave me a $50 gift card to a restaurant chain. Melissa didn't get me anything, explaining that she was too broke despite the new iPhone I could see peeking out of her designer purse. I told myself it was fine that I didn't give to receive, but something inside me was beginning to shift. Then came my father's 60th birthday 3 months ago. I offered to take everyone to Morton's Steakhouse, the most expensive restaurant in the area. As I sat there watching my family order the priciest items on the menu without a second thought about who was paying, I realized how much resentment had built up over the years. But I still wasn't prepared for what would happen next. The evening started pleasantly enough at Morton's Steakhouse. The restaurant's dim lighting and rich mahogany interior created an atmosphere of luxury that seemed to put everyone in a good mood. I had reserved a private corner table and ordered a bottle of Macallan 18 for my father, who beamed with pleasure when the waiter presented it. "Only the best for your birthday, Dad," I said, genuinely happy to see him enjoying himself. My mother looked elegant in a new dress I suspected she had purchased specifically for the occasion. Melissa arrived 20 minutes late as usual, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my first month's rent after college. The conversation flowed easily at first, focusing on Dad's birthday and his plans for the fishing trip I had gifted him. We reminisced about family vacations from years ago, carefully avoiding any topics that might lead to tension. For a brief moment, I felt the warmth of family connection that I had always craved. Then came the pivot that would change everything. "So, Jason," Melissa said, swirling her third glass of $80 wine, "I heard from Mom that you got a big promotion at work. Vice President of something boring, right?" I smiled tightly. "Senior Vice President of Financial Systems Architecture. It came with a nice raise and some stock options." My father clapped me on the shoulder. "That's my boy. Always the achiever." What should have been a moment of familial pride quickly turned sour as Melissa's expression shifted to something calculating. "That's perfect timing," she said, setting down her glass. "My car is making that weird noise again, and the mechanic says the transmission is going. I was thinking since you got this big promotion, you could help me get a new one. I really like the new BMW 3 Series." The request hung in the air as I carefully cut a piece of my steak, which had suddenly lost its flavor. This wasn't an unusual occurrence, but something about the entitlement in her tone, the assumption that my professional achievement equated to her personal windfall, struck a deeper nerve than usual. "I don't think that's a good idea, Melissa," I said calmly. "Your car is only 4 years old, and a transmission repair would be much more economical than a new BMW. Besides, you might consider getting a part-time job to contribute to your own expenses. You're 29 now." The table fell silent. My parents exchanged worried glances while Melissa's face flushed red. "Wow," she finally said. "Success has really changed you. You used to care about family." "I do care about family," I replied. "I pay your tuition. I pay Mom and Dad's mortgage. I'm taking everyone out for a $500 dinner tonight. But there's a difference between helping and enabling." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "So now you're calling me some kind of charity case. You're just showing off how much better you are than everyone else. You always do this." "Do what exactly?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Act superior. Just last month at Rachel's party, you spent the whole time talking about your fancy job and making me look bad in front of my friends. Everyone was asking why I'm still in school, while my big brother is some hotshot executive. Do you know how humiliating that was?" This was news to me. "Melissa, I didn't even talk to your friends at that party. I said hello to Rachel, congratulated her on her engagement, and spent most of the evening chatting with her parents about their retirement plans." "See," she hissed, "that's exactly what I mean. You're calling me a liar now." My mother reached across the table to pat Melissa's hand. I'm sure your brother didn't mean to upset you, honey. Jason, you know your sister is sensitive about her academic progress. I stared at my mother in disbelief. I hadn't attended Rachel's party with the intention of discussing my job or making Melissa look bad. In fact, I barely mentioned my work that evening. Melissa was completely fabricating the story, yet my parents were already taking her side without question. I didn't say anything about her academic progress. I said firmly, I'm simply declining to buy her a luxury car when she already has a perfectly functional vehicle that just needs repairs. My father's jovial birthday mood had evaporated. Jason, there's no need to be difficult. If you got a big promotion, sharing some of that blessing with your sister seems reasonable. I already share plenty, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the growing frustration. I've been paying for her education for 6 years now. I'm happy to help with necessary expenses, but a BMW is a luxury, not a necessity. Melissa's eyes welled with tears that I knew from childhood experience were entirely strategic. You're so selfish. You make all this money and live in your fancy condo while I'm struggling to finish school. What kind of brother are you? The rest of dinner proceeded in uncomfortable silence, interspersed with my parents' attempts to smooth things over with superficial conversation. When the $380 bill arrived, no one even pretended to reach for it. I paid without comment, adding a generous tip for the waiter who had endured our tense family drama. The drive back to my parents' house for birthday cake was excruciating. I took my own car, needing the 20 minutes of solitude to calm my thoughts. Melissa rode with our parents, undoubtedly spinning the narrative further in her favor during the drive. As I followed their car through familiar neighborhoods, I found myself mentally calculating exactly how much money I had given my family over the past 4 years. The figure was staggering well into the 6 figures. What was even more staggering was the realization that not once had anyone acknowledged the magnitude of my support or shown genuine gratitude. I pulled into my parents' driveway behind their car, watching as Melissa stormed into the house ahead of them. Through the windshield, I could see my parents exchanging concerned looks before heading inside, neither of them waiting for me. Taking a deep breath, I turned off the engine and prepared to face what I somehow knew would be the point of no return. The birthday celebration was clearly over, but something else entirely was about to begin. I entered my parents' house with a sense of foreboding. The familiar scent of Mom's vanilla candles and Dad's leather recliner that normally brought comfort now felt suffocating. The birthday cake sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. 60 unlit candles, a sad reminder of the celebration that should have been. The living room was arranged like a tribunal. My father occupied his recliner, face flushed with anger. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Melissa stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes red from her performance of victimhood. No one spoke as I took a seat in the armchair across from them. The silence stretched uncomfortably until my father finally broke it with a thunderous voice I rarely heard. Jason, we need to discuss your attitude problem. I blinked, genuinely surprised. My attitude problem? Yes, he continued, leaning forward. Your mother and I have noticed how you've changed since getting this promotion. The way you spoke to your sister at dinner was completely unacceptable. My mother nodded in agreement. We raised you better than this, Jason. Success is no excuse for forgetting where you came from, or who was there for you all along. The irony of this statement was almost laughable. Who had been there for me? Certainly not my parents, who had missed my college graduation because Melissa had a minor cold. Not my sister, who had borrowed money for textbooks only to post Instagram photos from Cancun the following week. All I did was decline to buy Melissa a BMW, I said calmly. I don't think that constitutes an attitude problem. It's not what you said, it's how you said it, my mother replied, using the same phrase she'd deployed throughout my childhood whenever I dared question the favoritism. Melissa stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. You humiliated me at dinner, just like you did at Rachel's party. You're always finding ways to make me feel small because I'm not as successful as you. Do you know what it's like living in your shadow? Everyone compares us, and you just love making sure they know how much better you are. I started to respond, to point out again that her claims about Rachel's party were completely fabricated, but my father cut me off. Your sister has struggled with confidence issues her entire life, and instead of building her up, you tear her down. What kind of brother does that? In that moment, something crystallized in my mind. This was a script they had performed countless times throughout my life. Melissa would lie or exaggerate. My parents would rally to protect her fragile ego, and I would be cast as the villain for simply existing as my authentic self. I've never torn Melissa down, I said firmly. In fact, I've supported her in every way possible, including financially. Here we go, Melissa snorted. He's going to throw it in our faces again, how he pays for everything. My mother shot me a disapproving look. Jason, financial support doesn't give you the right to mistreat your sister. Mistreat her by declining to buy her a luxury car. My father stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over me. That's enough. Your sister deserves an apology right now for how you embarrassed her at dinner and for your continued disrespect. I didn't disrespect anyone, I maintained. I simply set a boundary. That's when my father roared the words that would change everything. Apologize to your sister, or you're not family. The room fell silent. My mother gasped slightly but didn't contradict him. Melissa's tear-stained face transformed momentarily, and that's when I caught it, a small, satisfied smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth before she quickly resumed her victim expression. In that instant, with perfect clarity, I saw the entirety of our family dynamic laid bare. I wasn't a son or brother to them. I was an ATM with legs, a resource to be manipulated and drained. And now they were threatening to cut me off from the family as if that was their leverage, when in reality I was the one keeping everything afloat. I did a rapid mental calculation of exactly what I had provided: $120,000 for Melissa's seemingly endless education, roughly $90,000 in mortgage payments over the past 3 years, another $30,000 in emergency funds for everything from home repairs to medical bills not covered by insurance, plus countless dinners, gifts, and small loans that were never repaid. For the first time in my life, I felt completely calm and certain about what I needed to do. I looked directly at Melissa, whose smirk had vanished, replaced by an expectant look as she waited for my inevitable capitulation. Fine, I said quietly. She can pay her own tuition. The words landed like a bomb in the center of the room. My father's face red with anger moments before drained to a ghostly white. My mother's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her throat. What did you just say? My father whispered. I said Melissa can pay her own tuition, I repeated, rising from my chair. And her own car repairs. And you can pay your own mortgage. You don't mean that? My mother said, panic creeping into her voice. You're just upset right now. We all say things we don't mean when we're angry. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied, reaching for my jacket. I'm done being the family ATM while being treated like an outsider. My father's voice lost its authoritative edge, replaced by something approaching fear. Now hold on, Jason. Let's not be hasty. Your mother and I were just concerned about the dynamic between you and your sister. The dynamic where I pay for everything and get nothing but criticism in return. That dynamic. Jason, please, my mother pleaded, suddenly frantic. Your sister didn't mean to upset you. We can all sit down and work this out. I looked at Melissa, whose face had transformed completely. The tears had dried up instantly, replaced by a calculating look as she assessed the damage to her financial future. Wait, she said, her voice losing its wounded quality. You can't just cut us off. What about my last year of school? What about my living expenses? What about them? I replied. You're 29 years old, Melissa. Maybe it's time you supported yourself like I've been doing since I was 18. My father stepped toward me, his tone now conciliatory. Son, I think we all got a little carried away. Why don't we enjoy some birthday cake and talk about this tomorrow when everyone's calmer? But I was already walking toward the door. There's nothing to discuss. You gave me a choice: apologize, or I'm not family. I've made my choice, and now you get to live with the consequences. Jason, wait. My mother called, real tears forming in her eyes. Please don't go like this. We can fix this. I paused at the door, turning back one last time. You know what's interesting? Not once in this entire conversation did anyone apologize to me. Not for the lies, not for the manipulation, not for treating me like an outsider in my own family for 30 years. That tells me everything I need to know. With those words, I walked out, closing the door on decades of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. As I drove away, my phone began buzzing with texts and calls, but I didn't answer. For the first time in my adult life, I felt unburdened, as if I'd put down a heavy weight I'd been carrying for as long as I could remember. I had no idea then just how desperate things would get for the family I left behind, or how completely their financial house of cards would collapse without my support. But I was about to find out. The 30-minute drive back to my condo passed in a blur. My phone buzzed constantly with incoming calls and messages, but I ignored them all. When I finally reached home, I placed my phone on the kitchen counter and watched as notifications lit up the screen like a Christmas tree gone haywire. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, all from my family. I silenced the phone and poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey, sinking onto my sofa to process what had just happened. Despite the magnitude of my decision, I felt strangely calm. Not happy, not vindicated, just peaceful, like I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying for decades. After finishing my drink, I plugged my phone in to charge and went to bed without checking any of the messages. For the first time in years, I slept a full 8 hours without waking. The next morning, I woke to 94 text messages and 39 missed calls. I scrolled through the texts without opening them, seeing the progression from anger to disbelief to panic. "How dare you walk out like that, Dad? 9:45 p.m. Call us right now, young man. Mom, 9:50 p.m. You can't be serious about the tuition. I have finals next week, Melissa. 10:15 p.m. Your mother is crying. I hope you're happy. Dad, 10:30 p.m. Please call us back, Jason. We need to talk. Mom, 1:45 p.m. What about the mortgage payment due next week? Dad, 7:15 a.m. After a strong cup of coffee, I sat down at my computer and systematically canceled every automatic payment I had set up for my family. Melissa's tuition portal was first followed by the direct deposit to my parents' checking account for their mortgage. I canceled the utility bill auto payments I'd established for their house, the car insurance payments for Melissa's Honda, and the cell phone family plan I'd been covering for years. It took less than 30 minutes to dismantle the financial support system I'd built over years. When I finished, I called my financial advisor to schedule an urgent appointment, then my therapist to do the same. Finally, I blocked my family's numbers on my phone, allowing myself to focus on work without constant interruptions. The next week passed in a strange combination of productivity and reflection. Without the drain of family drama and financial obligations, I found myself with both more money and more mental energy. I threw myself into a major project at work, staying late to implement a new financial tracking system I'd been wanting to develop for months. On Friday, a week after the confrontation, I checked my personal email for the first time since that night. Among the usual promotional messages and newsletters was an email from my mother sent from her work account to bypass my phone block. Jason, please respond. The mortgage payment bounced and the bank called. Dad and I don't have enough in savings to cover it. Melissa is hysterical about her tuition. We need to resolve this as a family. We're sorry if we upset you, but this punishment is too extreme. Notice the careful wording, sorry if we upset you, not sorry we upset you, and framing my boundary as a punishment rather than a consequence of their actions. Classic manipulation tactics that I now recognized clearly. I deleted the email without responding. The following Monday, I met with my financial advisor, Laura, to restructure my investments and budget now that I wasn't supporting 3 additional adults. This frees up nearly $4,000 monthly, Laura noted, looking impressed. We can significantly increase your retirement contributions and still have room for additional investments or lifestyle improvements. Let's max out the retirement accounts and put the rest toward the down payment fund for a house, I decided, feeling a surge of possibility at directing my resources toward my own future for once. That afternoon, my assistant buzzed my office intercom. Jason, there are 2 people in the lobby insisting on seeing you. They say they're your parents, and it's an emergency. Security wants to know if they should escort them up. My stomach dropped. Absolutely not. Please tell security to escort them out of the building. 15 minutes later, my assistant messaged again. Security had to threaten to call the police. Your mother was crying and your father was shouting that you're destroying the family. Just wanted you to know, in case you leave the office today. And they're waiting outside. I thanked her and arranged for a security guard to walk me to my car that evening. Sure enough, my parents' car was parked across the street, but they didn't approach when they saw me with the guard. That night I received an email from a name I didn't recognize with the subject line, "Legal matter regarding Walker family." Opening it cautiously, I discovered it was from a lawyer claiming to represent my parents. Dear Mr. Walker, I have been retained by Richard and Barbara Walker regarding the verbal contracts you established with them concerning financial support. They maintain that your sudden withdrawal of funds constitutes a breach of implied contract and has caused significant financial hardship. We request that you reinstate payments immediately while we work toward a formal agreement. I laughed out loud at the absurdity, then forwarded the email to my own attorney. He called me the next morning. This is complete nonsense, he assured me. There was no contract implied or otherwise. Gifts are not legally binding agreements, and you have no obligation to continue financial support for adult family members. This is just an intimidation tactic. I'll send a brief response informing them that there is no legal basis for their claim. By the end of the second week, my family's attempts at contact had become more desperate and less frequent. The lawyer never responded to my attorney's letter. The daily emails from my mother dwindled to every few days, then weekly. My sister tried creating fake social media accounts to message me after I blocked her original profiles, but I recognized her writing style immediately and blocked those too. Meanwhile, mutual friends and extended family members began reaching out with confused messages. Hey Jason, your mom called me crying about some family emergency. Everything okay, dude? Melissa is telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown and abandoned the family. What's going on? Your dad called asking if I could loan him money for their mortgage. Should I be worried? I responded to these with brief factual explanations. I've decided to stop financially supporting my parents and sister after years of being taken for granted. I'm fine. Just establishing healthy boundaries. They're adults and will need to support themselves now. Some people understood immediately, having witnessed the dynamics of our family over the years. Others took my parents' side, sending judgmental messages about family obligations and loyalty. I let those relationships go without argument, recognizing that anyone who thought I was obligated to bankroll my entire family indefinitely wasn't someone I needed in my life. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call from my cousin Michael, who lived in the same neighborhood as my parents. Jason, I thought you should know. I drove by your parents' house yesterday and noticed their electricity was out. The whole house was dark and they were using candles. Your mom was too proud to tell me directly, but she hinted that they couldn't pay the bill. I thanked him for the information and ended the call, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty, knowing my parents were sitting in the dark. Another part recognized that they had 2 working vehicles they could sell, numerous luxury items they could pawn, and the ability to get jobs to support themselves like millions of other 60-year-olds did. This was a consequence of their choices, not my cruelty. That night, I attended my second therapy session since the confrontation. My therapist, Dr. Marshall, listened attentively as I described the recent developments. How are you feeling about their financial struggles? He asked after I finished. Conflicted, I admitted. I don't want them to suffer, but I also recognize that I'm not responsible for supporting capable adults who treated me poorly for decades. I keep reminding myself that they have options they're choosing not to take. Dr. Marshall nodded. That's an important distinction. You're not wishing harm on them. You're simply allowing them to experience the natural consequences of their own choices. It's part of breaking the cycle of enablement that's been established. As I drove home from therapy, I realized that this insight applied not just to my family's financial situation, but to our entire relationship. For years, I had enabled their treatment of me by accepting it, excusing it, and even financing it. By withdrawing my support, both emotional and financial, I was finally allowing reality to break through the dysfunctional patterns we had established. I had no way of knowing then just how severe that reality check would become for them in the coming months. A month after our confrontation, I had settled into a new routine. Without the constant drain of family drama and financial obligations, I found myself thriving both professionally and personally. I joined a rock climbing gym, started dating again, and even took a weekend trip to Chicago just because I wanted to, an indulgence I had never allowed myself when supporting my family. Though I had blocked their direct communications, news about my family filtered through to me via mutual connections. My father's longtime friend Bill called one evening with an update he thought I should hear. "I'm not taking sides here, Jason," he began awkwardly, "but I wanted you to know your parents missed their second mortgage payment. The bank sent them a formal warning letter. Richard asked me for a loan, but I'm not in a position to help with that kind of money." I thanked Bill for the information without commenting further. 2 missed mortgage payments was concerning, but not catastrophic. They still had time to sell the house voluntarily before things escalated to foreclosure. A week later, my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, left a voicemail. "Jason, I just had lunch with Barbara and I'm worried about her. She looks like she's lost 15 pounds and Richard is having chest pains from the stress. They told me Melissa had to drop out of college with just 1 semester left. I know there are 2 sides to every story, but is there any way you could help them just finish Melissa's education? Call me back, please." I didn't return her call. The mention of my father's chest pains concerned me, but I also recognized it as a potential manipulation tactic. As for Melissa dropping out of college, that was a natural consequence of not having someone else foot the bill. After 6 years and multiple major changes, perhaps it was time for her education to reflect her own investment and commitment. 3 days later, I ran into Rachel, the friend whose party had featured in Melissa's fabricated story about me showing off. We chatted briefly about mutual friends before she lowered her voice. "I heard about the family drama. For what it's worth, Melissa has been telling everyone wild stories about you cutting them off because you had a mental breakdown. But when I mentioned that you barely talked about yourself at my engagement party, she got flustered and changed the subject. I think some people are starting to see through her act." This confirmed what I had suspected. Melissa was spinning narratives to maintain her victim status and vilify me. But without my financial support to smooth over the practical consequences of her lies, the truth was becoming harder to disguise. By the 6-week mark, the situation had deteriorated further. My mother's coworker Jamie reached out via LinkedIn. "Your mom came into work crying yesterday. They had their water shut off for non-payment and she's showering at the YMCA before coming to the office. She's also been asking about extra shifts. I thought you should know." I felt a pang of sympathy imagining my mother, who had always been fastidious about her appearance, having to shower at a public facility before work. But I also noted that she was taking practical steps by seeking additional income, something she could have done years ago, rather than relying on my support. Around the 2-month mark, my cousin Michael called again with more news. "I drove by the house yesterday and saw your dad's Cadillac is gone. Your mom's car too. They're driving some old Toyota now. Barbara told my mom they had to sell both cars to catch up on bills." This was actually a positive development. The Cadillac had been a luxury they couldn't afford, purchased 3 years ago with a loan from me that was never repaid. Downsizing to a single economical vehicle was a sensible financial decision that would reduce their expenses significantly. The most shocking update came from Bill again, now almost 3 months after the confrontation. "Jason, I'm worried about your father. He's working as a cashier at Walmart now, overnight shift. He looks terrible, like he's aged 10 years and 3 months. Barbara is waitressing at Denny's Bronson's. They're trying to catch up on the mortgage, but the bank has started foreclosure proceedings." This news hit me harder than expected. My proud father, who had managed a hardware store for 25 years, was now working overnight at Walmart at age 60. My mother, who had always looked down on service industry jobs, was waiting tables. Part of me admired their resilience in finally taking responsibility for their finances. But another part ached, thinking about the stress and humiliation they must be experiencing. As for the foreclosure, I wasn't surprised. Even with their new jobs, catching up on 3 missed mortgage payments plus late fees would be nearly impossible on entry-level wages. The house had been too expensive for them from the beginning, which was why I had started subsidizing the payments in the first place. Then came the news about Melissa. My cousin Jessica texted, "Just FYI, Melissa moved to Florida with some guy she met online. Left last weekend. Your parents are pretty devastated." This development fit Melissa's pattern perfectly. When situations became difficult, she escaped often with the help of a new romantic interest. I wondered if my parents finally saw the truth while I had stood by them consistently despite being treated as the lesser child. Their golden daughter had abandoned them the moment they couldn't provide for her needs. The most difficult moment came 4 months after the confrontation, when I received a formal letter from the hospital where my father had been treated for a stress-induced cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but a warning sign that required medication and lifestyle changes. The letter wasn't asking for money. It was simply a notification as next of kin. Still, it shook me. I called the hospital, and without identifying myself as family, asked about the status of the patient named in the letter. The nurse confirmed he had been discharged and was in stable condition. That night I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey, watching the Detroit skyline and reflecting on everything that had transpired. My family was experiencing genuine hardship, direct consequences of the financial house of cards they had built on my support. Part of me felt responsible, but a stronger part recognized that this reckoning had been inevitable. If not now, then when my father was 70, 80, would I have carried the financial burden for my entire life, sacrificing my own goals and future? I consulted with Dr. Marshall again, sharing my concerns about my father's health situation. "It's natural to feel conflicted," he assured me. "You can care about their well-being while still maintaining your boundaries. The question to ask yourself is whether resuming financial support would actually help them in the long run, or simply enable the same dysfunctional patterns to continue." This framing helped clarify my thinking. My parents were finally learning to live within their means, working jobs they had previously considered beneath them, and facing the consequences of decades of financial mismanagement. Melissa had shown her true colors by abandoning them when they could no longer support her lifestyle. Painful as this period was for all of us, perhaps it was a necessary transition toward a more honest and sustainable family dynamic. I decided to maintain my boundaries while remaining open to the possibility of a different kind of relationship with my parents in the future, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. I wasn't ready to reach out yet, but I was no longer firmly closed to the idea of eventual reconciliation under the right circumstances. What I didn't expect was how soon that opportunity would present itself, or the form it would take. 6 months after I had walked out of my parents' house, I was pushing a cart through the produce section of Kroger when I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned to see my father, and the sight of him stopped me in my tracks. The man before me looked a decade older than the father I remembered. His face was gaunt, with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. The confident posture I had known all my life was gone, replaced by slightly stooped shoulders. He wore a Walmart employee jacket and jeans that hung loosely on his thinner frame. "Jason," he said again, his voice carrying a tentative note I had never heard before. "Dad," I replied, unsure what else to say. We stood awkwardly among the vegetables, other shoppers navigating around our unexpected reunion. Finally, he spoke. "I wasn't sure you'd even talk to me." "I'm willing to talk," I said carefully. "I just wasn't willing to be manipulated or taken advantage of anymore." He nodded, looking down at his shopping basket, which contained only basics: bread, eggs, peanut butter, bananas. The absence of the premium brands and luxury items that had once filled their pantry was striking. "Could we maybe grab a coffee?" he asked. "Just to talk. No pressure." I hesitated, then nodded. "Let me pay for my groceries first. I'll meet you at the Starbucks next door in 15 minutes. When I arrived at the coffee shop, my father was already seated at a corner table with 2 cups. "I remembered you take it black," he said, pushing one toward me. "Thanks," I replied, sitting down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. 6 months of silence stretched between us like an invisible barrier. "The house is gone," he finally said. "Bank took it last month. Your mother and I are in a 1-bedroom apartment near the Walmart where I work." I nodded, waiting for him to continue rather than offering sympathy or questions. "Melissa left for Florida with some guy she met online. Hasn't called in 3 months except once to ask for money, which we obviously couldn't give her." He gave a bitter laugh. "Funny how fast she disappeared when the well ran dry." I sipped my coffee, still saying nothing. "I've had a lot of time to think," my father continued, his voice quieter now. Working overnight at Walmart gives you plenty of hours to reflect on where you went wrong in life. He looked up at me, and I was surprised to see genuine remorse in his eyes. Your sister has been manipulating us for years, hasn't she? Playing your mother and me against you, making up stories, always the victim. The admission was so unexpected that I nearly choked on my coffee. Yes, I said simply. I see it now. All those times we took her side without question. All those times we demanded more from you, while expecting nothing from her. I don't know how to make that right, Jason. Part of me wanted to say, you can't. But another part recognized the courage it took for my proud father to admit his mistakes. Melissa is who she is, I said carefully. I don't blame her as much as I blame the dynamic we all participated in. You and Mom enabled her. I enabled all of you by financing everything without setting boundaries. He nodded slowly. Your mother still doesn't fully see it. She misses Melissa terribly. Keeps making excuses for why she doesn't call or visit. Says she's just finding herself down in Florida. He shook his head. At 60 years old, I'm finally learning that you can't keep making excuses for an adult child who refuses to grow up. That's a painful lesson, I acknowledged. The hardest part, he continued, is knowing we treated you unfairly all those years. You were the responsible one, the achiever, the provider. And somehow we held that against you while rewarding Melissa for her failures. The validation of what I had felt my entire life, but had never heard acknowledged, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Why did you really cut us off, Jason? Was it just about the BMW? Or was it something deeper? I considered my answer carefully. It was about dignity. That night when you demanded I apologize to Melissa for a boundary I had every right to set while she smirked behind your back, I suddenly saw with perfect clarity that I wasn't a son to you. I was a resource, an ATM. And I deserved better. My father winced at my words but didn't deny them. I wish I could say you're wrong. But looking back at how much we took from you, not just money but emotional support while giving so little in return, he shook his head. I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to see us again. I'm sitting here, aren't I? I said, softening my tone slightly. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Yes, you are. More than we deserve. So what now, I asked. What are you hoping for from this conversation? He looked me straight in the eye. Not money, if that's what you're wondering. Your mother and I are managing. It's not the lifestyle we had before, but we're keeping the lights on and food in the fridge. We both work full-time. We've learned to live within our means. I nodded, genuinely impressed by their adaptation. What I'm hoping for, he continued, is a chance to rebuild some kind of relationship with my son. Not based on what you can do for us, but on who you are. A man I'm actually very proud of, though I've done a terrible job of showing it. The words "I'm proud of you" from my father were so unexpected that I felt momentarily disoriented. How long had I waited to hear that simple affirmation? That would take time, I said cautiously. And things would have to be different. Really different. I understand, he replied. I'm not asking for everything to go back to how it was. That wouldn't be healthy for any of us. I'm just asking for a chance to try something new. Maybe a monthly lunch just to start. I considered his request. Part of me remained wary, wondering if this was just another manipulation tactic. But the evidence of his changed circumstances was right before me in his worn clothing, tired eyes, and humbled demeanor. I could do lunch, I agreed finally. Once a month, neutral territory like this. We'll see how it goes. The relief on his face was palpable. Thank you, Jason. That's more than fair. As we finished our coffee, he asked tentatively about my life, and work listening with genuine interest to my responses, without interrupting or comparing my experiences to Melissa's for the first time I could remember. 2 weeks later, I received a call from my mother. Our conversation was more difficult than the one with my father. She vacillated between genuine remorse and subtle attempts to make me feel guilty for their reduced circumstances. She still defended Melissa, suggesting that her disappearance to Florida was somehow my fault for withdrawing financial support. Mom, I said, finally I'm willing to have a relationship with you and Dad moving forward. But it has to be based on reality. not the family mythology we've maintained all these years. Melissa is a 30-year-old woman who chose to abandon you when you could no longer financially support her. That's not my responsibility. There was a long silence before she responded. I always thought she was the fragile one who needed extra support. But she left us without a backward glance while you're still willing to talk to us after everything. Maybe I've had it backwards all these years. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of the dysfunctional dynamics, but it was a start. We agreed that she would join my father and me for our next lunch. Over the following months, I established careful, boundaried contact with my parents. We met for lunch every few weeks at a restaurant of my choosing, always moderately priced places where I would pick up the check without discussion. I learned about their new lives, the small apartment they now shared, their jobs, their adjusted expectations. My father seemed genuinely transformed by the experience, exhibiting humility and gratitude I had never seen in him before. My mother's journey was more complicated. She still occasionally slipped into martyrdom or attempted emotional manipulation, but I became adept at, gently, but firmly redirecting those conversations. Melissa remained in Florida, calling my parents only sporadically, usually when she needed something. Their inability to provide financial assistance meant these calls became increasingly rare. I had no direct contact with her, and felt no desire to establish any. 8 months after our initial confrontation, my parents invited me to their apartment for dinner for the first time. I accepted with some trepidation, unsure how I would feel seeing their reduced circumstances firsthand. Their apartment was small but clean and organized. Dinner was simple homemade spaghetti rather than expensive takeout or restaurant-quality meals. What struck me most was that they had adapted, without bitterness. There were even moments of laughter as my father recounted tales from his overnight shifts at Walmart. As I prepared to leave that evening, my mother handed me a small envelope. Inside was a check for $300, with first repayment written in the memo line. "We know it's just symbolic compared to everything you gave us," my father explained. "But we've started putting aside a little each month. We don't expect to repay everything, that's not realistic. But we want you to know we recognize our debt, both financial and emotional." I was touched by the gesture, not for the money itself, which was indeed symbolic, but for the acknowledgement it represented. After a moment's thought, I handed the check back. "Keep it," I said. "Put it toward building your emergency fund instead. I don't need repayment. What I needed was recognition and respect, which you're giving me now." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We don't deserve your forgiveness." "This isn't about deserving," I replied. "It's about moving forward with clear eyes and healthy boundaries." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past 8 months. My family had been forced to confront reality in painful ways, but that confrontation had ultimately created space for something more authentic to emerge. Not perfect, not without complications, but grounded in truth rather than denial and enablement. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my relationship with my parents might eventually become something I valued rather than endured. And that possibility, however tentative, felt like its own kind of victory. 1 year after the night I walked out of my parents' house, I sat on the balcony of my new home watching the sunset over the lake. I had purchased the waterfront property 3 months earlier, a goal I never could have achieved while supporting my family financially. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, bought with money I had earned and saved through discipline and hard work. My phone buzzed with a text from my father, just confirming lunch tomorrow at 1. "Your mother made that apple cake you liked as a kid. Hope that's okay." I smiled and texted back, "Looking forward to it. Tell her thanks." Our monthly family lunches had evolved into a weekly tradition, rotating between restaurants and their apartment. Today would be different. We were meeting at my new home for the first time. I had finally felt ready to invite them into this part of my life, confident that they would respect it as my achievement rather than viewing it as a resource they were entitled to access. My parents had settled into their new reality with surprising resilience. My father had been promoted to department manager at Walmart with slightly better hours and pay. My mother still worked at Denny's but had developed a regular clientele who appreciated her warm service and tipped well. They would never regain the lifestyle they had when I was subsidizing them, but they had found a sustainable middle ground that allowed for small pleasures within their means. Melissa remained in Florida, having cycled through 3 boyfriends and 4 jobs in the past year, according to my parents' occasional updates. She still called them primarily when she needed something, though the requests had downsized from help with rent to smaller asks like care packages or birthday gifts. I had maintained my distance, neither seeking contact nor responding to the few tentative messages she had sent through mutual friends. My own life had flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant drain of family drama and financial obligation, I had accelerated my career trajectory, earning another promotion and substantial raise. I had developed new friendships with people who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could provide. And 6 months ago, I had met Lauren, a pediatric physical therapist whose independence and emotional intelligence were refreshingly compatible with my own. As I prepared my home for my parents' visit, setting out coffee cups and arranging the apple cake on a serving plate, I reflected on the profound lessons the past year had taught me. First, that enabling behavior benefits no one. By constantly rescuing my family from the consequences of their choices, I had prevented them from developing the skills and resilience they needed. My father, who had once considered manual labor beneath him, now took pride in his work ethic and reliability at Walmart. My mother, who had depended on my financial support rather than increasing her own income, had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. Second, that boundaries are essential to healthy relationships. The weekly lunches with my parents worked precisely because they came with clear expectations I would pay for the meal we would spend approximately 2 hours together, and certain topics, particularly Melissa's fabricated narratives, were off limits. Within these parameters, we had developed a more authentic connection than we'd ever had during the years I was bankrolling their lifestyle. Third, that some relationships cannot be salvaged. My sister's disappearance from our parents' lives, once they could no longer finance her, had confirmed what I had long suspected: her attachments were transactional rather than emotional. I had accepted that a healthy relationship with Melissa was likely impossible, and that recognition had been liberating rather than saddening. Most importantly, I had learned that self-respect isn't selfish. By refusing to continue in a family dynamic that devalued and exploited me, I wasn't abandoning my responsibilities. I was establishing that I deserved basic consideration and gratitude. The crisis that followed had been painful for everyone involved, but it had ultimately cleared away decades of dysfunction to reveal the possibility of something healthier. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. I opened the door to find my parents standing somewhat nervously on the porch, my mother clutching the promised apple cake. "Welcome," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. They moved cautiously through the entryway, taking in the open floor plan and lake view with appreciative murmurs. "This is beautiful, Jason," my mother said, setting the cake on the kitchen counter. "You've done so well for yourself." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment without deflection, a small but significant change from my previous habit of minimizing my achievements to avoid making Melissa look bad by comparison. My father walked to the sliding glass doors that led to the deck. "That view is something else. You can see all the way across the lake." "That's what sold me on the place," I said, joining him. "Coffee on the deck at sunrise is pretty much perfect." He turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I'm proud of you, son. Not just for all this," he gestured at the house, "but for standing up for yourself last year. It took a lot of courage to walk away, more than I've ever had." Coming from my father, who had rarely acknowledged my achievements without qualifying them, the words carried special weight. "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd done the right thing, especially when I heard about the foreclosure and your health scare." "It was the right thing," he said firmly. "We needed that wake-up call. All of us. Your mother and I had been living in denial for years about Melissa, about our finances, about how we treated you. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from reality." My mother joined us at the window, linking her arm through my father's. "We've been talking about downsizing even further," she said. "The apartment is more than we need, now that we've adjusted our expectations. There's a senior living community with small cottages that would reduce our expenses and give us some money to add to our retirement fund." "That sounds sensible," I replied, genuinely pleased at this evidence of their continued financial maturation. "We won't ask you to help us move," my father added quickly. "We've hired some college kids from the community college." I smiled at his careful clarification. "I'd be happy to help if you need it." That's what family does. The difference is that now it's an offer freely given, not an expectation or obligation. We spent the afternoon enjoying lunch on the deck, talking easily about their jobs, my recent projects at work, and Lauren, whom they were eager to meet. My mother mentioned that Melissa had called the previous week, hinting about visiting but making no concrete plans. "She'll come when she needs something," my father said with a new clarity I admired. "And we'll love her because she's our daughter, but we won't enable her anymore." As the afternoon stretched into early evening, I walked my parents to their car, carrying a container of leftover cake that I had insisted they take home. Same time next Sunday, my mother asked, hugging me goodbye. "Actually," I said, "I was thinking maybe you could meet Lauren. There's a new Italian place downtown she's been wanting to try." My father's face brightened. "We'd like that very much." As I watched them drive away, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The family I had now was not the one I had imagined or hoped for growing up. It was smaller, more imperfect, bound by clearer expectations and limitations. But it was also more honest, more balanced, and ultimately more sustaining than the illusion we had maintained for so many years. The crisis that had begun with my refusal to apologize to Melissa had indeed cost my parents their home, their comfortable lifestyle, and their illusions about their golden child. But it had given them something more valuable: self-sufficiency, dignity, and a relationship with their son based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. As for me, I had lost the role of family ATM and gained something infinitely more precious: the knowledge that I deserved better, the courage to demand it, and the wisdom to build a life filled with relationships that enriched rather than depleted me. That night, as I texted Lauren to finalize our plans for introducing her to my parents, I felt grateful for the painful but necessary journey that had brought me here. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most important growth. Sometimes walking away is the only path forward. And sometimes when we finally stop carrying others, we discover just how far we ourselves can go. What about you? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision about boundaries with family members? Did you struggle with guilt afterward? Or did you find it liberating? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through life's challenges. Thank you for listening, and remember, setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for both your well-being and the growth of those around you.